How's your morning going, Harrison, before we start? How is it in Washington? We might get a storm here in New York.
No, you're going to get very wet tonight.
Good.
And so are we. And you're very lucky that it's not worse than that, because if you live just further north, you'd probably end up tomorrow morning, I don't know, till 14 inches of snow. Are we started? Is that
Yes, we're ready to roll.
It was a very sort of gentle transition to you.
okay? Well, that's all right. Thank you. Gentle transition. I'm into gentle transitions here. Some of you might have noticed our world seems to be rather at sixes and sevens, which is the way the Brits talk about things not being quite the way we expected them. And I don't know whether it was 8 or 10 years ago, I was talking to my friend Gerardo in Belgrade, we happened to be. And he was sure that World War III had started. And I said, no, I didn't think so. I thought it was both better and worse. Or to repurpose the phrase from Mr. Dickens, it was the best of times and the worst of times, both. It was better in the sense that all of a sudden we had the opportunity to see things as they actually were. And worse, in that we were seeing things as they actually were. There's been a lot of conversation about a certain gentleman who occupies a house at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And my personal opinion of him is probably not repeatable in public, but I also have to say that the Donald is just the Donald. He hasn't been any different for as long as anybody can remember if they lived in New York. He happens to have a different address and he doesn't seem to be very comfortable there, but he's basically the same old fellow he was. And the fact that he could be what he is, what he's always been, maybe it's sort of a shorthand way of saying, you know, there's been an awful lot going on that we just really haven't talked about. Or we found the biggest rug that we could push it under, or whatever. Roughly in the same period that I was talking to my friend Gerardo, I noticed from some of my military friends and State Department friends, I live in Washington and that's sort of what we do here. They were using this odd phrase. They were talking about asymmetric warfare and asymmetric diplomacy. And being a curious sort, I said, well, excuse me, but what does that mean? And either quickly or more slowly, the truth came out that what asymmetric warfare or diplomacy meant was those other people weren't playing by the rules. I think there's a lesson here. Whether we like it or not, and I think generally speaking, we've liked it. We've been living for the better part of 70 to 100 years in sort of a golden age for some people on this planet. And everybody knew what a state was, and everybody knew what the rules of war were, and everybody knew how things were supposed to be done. That doesn't mean they were always done that way. But at least we knew how it was supposed to be. So our Department of State people, and the same would be true in the British Isles and Scandinavia and other parts of Europe and etc., could go to school and learn the principles of diplomacy. The military types could go to West Point or wherever and do the same thing about war. And it seemed that all we really had to do is do more and better of what we had always been doing, and things were going to get better and better. Well, is that true? I was thinking about this morning and what my hope would be. And yeah, I'll just put it the way it came into my head. I know about all the odd things that come into my head. They are sometimes rather surprising, but what was coming into my head was there was my absolute hope that if I did nothing else, I would drive you into massive confusion. And I thought, well, that's not very kind. But one of the things that I've discovered, which is not necessarily to say it's true, but it's been true for me, that confusion is almost inevitably the beginning of wisdom. It's when you think you have everything precisely ordered and understood that you're probably in the worst shape. And you're certainly not in any position to discover something new because you already know what it is. And then you get to that wonderful thing called confusion. And all those things that you thought were so turned out to be rather different. The world, the neighborhood, the nature of humanity, I don't know, extend the list as far as you want. There's more to it than met the eye. Some of that was just, I guess, very practical and physical. I can remember as I grew up, now that was a long time ago, but the extent of the universe was the Milky Way, and we didn't think much beyond that. As a matter of fact, the solar system seemed to be fairly grandiose. And as I think we've come to understand, this teeny little fragment of solar driftwood we call home is resident at the part of a solar system which is third rate at best, in a galaxy that occupies a somewhere kind of space in, along with billions and billions and billions and billions of galaxies. Our place in the cosmos is massively different than we once thought, I do believe. Now, I think there are some things that start to happen when you find yourself at the edge of confusion, for whatever reason. First is we tend to get quite nervous. And nervous people behave in a, generally speaking, reasonably predictable way. You can describe it in one way or another, but sort of like circle the wagons. President Obama practically got crucified for saying this, but I think he was right. He said, when the people get worried, they grab their guns and Bibles. They grab what they think holds safety. And it turns out that it's a time when people who can apparently tell us how to do something, just, they do fine. It's the prime time for thugs and charlatans. But they actually are the symptoms. They don't change the situation. The situation, I think, that we're in is one which is, to say it again, best of times, worst of times. Most terrifying moment in our existence and also the most exciting. And to which nobody knows the answer. Another characteristic of such a moment is that in an effort to find some degree of security, we take solace in the fact that the others, those of the people who are not like us for whatever reason, are what, out to get us? And at least we have safety in our own numbers. And you can do it as readily as I can, but the number of groups of people around this world who have taken solace in the fact that the others are out there and we know what to do with them. In such a moment, there are people who are sure that they must have the answer or can get it. For some, it's just do more and more of what we've always done. Rule of law, don't you know? But then there is the interesting question, whose law? I think we're probably discovering that there are probably as many different bodies of law on this planet as there are distinct peoples. And it doesn't even divide out as neatly as that. So sure, rule of law is a nice idea, but whose law? Last year, a dingy idea popped into my head. And, this gathering seems to have something about open space, and people were saying, wouldn't it be nice if we could get the Congress into open space? I think it'd be a disaster. And the reason is that open space really only works when people are accepting an invitation. It's not a process that you can kind of lay on people. It's a reality that you can evoke by an invitation. Those of you who have come thinking you're going to learn how to do open space, I can tell you right now, you're here under fraudulent circumstances. You'll never learn how to do open space. If you're lucky, you're going to discover that you're already in open space. You simply have to be yourself. So I had this dingy idea, which was, If we find the waggles circled and the major defensive reaction popping up, at least for a lot of people, is, pointing fingers at the other, whoever the other is. And there are a lot of others. That's best, when you have a lot of other people. Look different. Eyes are different. Skin's different. Talk is different. Whatever. I mean, however difference is different. Then you can feel secure, right? Because we know what it's supposed to be. Well, right along with that is the notion that somebody has the plan. Somebody knows what to do. We're just waiting for the right person to come along and tell us. I think that's insanity. I think, and I think, anytime anybody walks up to you and says, I have the plan, this is what we have to do, I think you can safely turn away. Why? For a very simple reason. What we're in the midst of is so massive, so fast moving, so undefined, so extensive. We can't even think that. That being the case, how are you going to plan for it? Doesn't work. Too slow. Too gross. So do you go out and eat worms? Maybe. I don't know whether you caught the PBS special on Wednesday. It's called The Day the Dinosaurs Died. Actually, it's a marvelous show. As you probably remember, there was a little meteorite about 7 miles across, crashed into the Gulf of Mexico and gave us basically what is now the Yucatan Harbor, and blew everything all over the world. And the net effect was, guess what? The primal species disappeared in 24 hours. I think there's a lesson there. Or there could be. So where do you go from here? I suspicion that it's not going to be a small group of people who are going to figure out the answer. We don't even know what the question is. I suspicion that it's going to roll out when, how many people we got on this planet now? 800 billion, or 8 billion rather. When 8 billion people, if that's the number, start engaging each other. Now, if you think you got an impossible task ahead of you, how about a conversation for 8 billion? Getting the US Congress together would be a piece of cake. But the notion of convincing 8 billion people, which is, I think, where we're at for this one, just chain of logic, in what language, by what laws, by what logic tree? How do you do that? And the honest answer is, I don't know. But I think I might have a clue. If you think of this odd thing, which we've called open space, and that was the product of 2 martinis, remember? Not as a method or a procedure or something that we do to groups or whatever, anything like that. But rather as a ongoing natural experiment. I mean, nobody in their right mind would have done what we have done quite regularly. You know, take a bunch of angry people and have them sit in a circle, create a bulletin board, open a marketplace, and go to work. And recognize that the only time they could seriously screw it up would be when they tried to fix it. That the people, even in their anger and estrangement, could and did get beyond that. It always strikes me as interesting and strange, but actually it makes sense too. First open space happened in 1985. Just face it, 1985, there were 60 odd people sitting in a circle like you're sitting, and this crazy idiot stood in the middle of them and said, "What do you want to do?" And in about 2 hours, they had a seminar going for 4 days. Never had, I mean, they had argued points constantly. It was exciting. But there was a book at the time called Better Meetings. I know the people who wrote it, and they're nice folks. But if you looked what that book said, and it was saying it all over the world, it was popular. We violated everything. It couldn't happen. Worse than that, it shouldn't happen. Because if it did happen, there are a whole mess of folks who are making their money and life work by, quote, facilitating meetings. And they were out of business. So in any event, we've had this natural experiment going on. And one of the things we've learned, I think, is that you can invite massively hostile and aggressive people to come together around an issue that they're all concerned about. And while they'll certainly yell and scream, which is part of the human, I don't know, that's what we do. And it gets louder and worse if you happen to do it, live in Brooklyn or the Middle East or someplace like that. But if you happen to be in New England, same feelings are there, but it's a little quieter. But other than that, it's the same thing. So, just a thought. Perhaps it's now time to stop thinking about making a better method, teaching people the proper roles and rules, etc. But begin to see what the fundamental principles are. Or happenings. Principle sounds like that's something you could force on somebody or get them to learn them and do them. Because at the end of the day, it strikes me, having a serious conversation with 8 billion people, as impossible as that sounds, is kind of what's on our plate. Now, we can practice and learn how to do it better, how to be there without being there at all, how to even do simple things. Never mention the word open space. Let me end with a stupid story, I guess, but I'm 83 and I don't walk as well as I used to. So getting out of the house doesn't happen very much. I mean, it's not that I'm, totally disabled, but I just don't do that. And my wife, understandably, who is a lovely person, has made certain noises that it would be nice if I got out of the house, don't you know? And I said, yes, thank you very much. And all of a sudden she came home with a note from a friend of ours. He said there was this strange outfit in Washington called Ollie, Olli, which ran at American universities. I'd never heard of it, but it turns out Ollie is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. I think it's countrywide. I suspect it's in other places, but I didn't know anything about it. And my wife's suggestion was that, you know, they had a website. I could go on it and, I don't know, it might interest me. So I did. And the first URL that I saw to click, I mean, there were other things, but the first one I saw said, would you like to offer a course? I confess that this was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and guess what? Martini time. So I clicked on it. And it said, what is the name of your course? Well, needless to say, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So the first words that came into my head were death, dying, and life. I mean, I couldn't think of how to turn anything around more than that. Ordinarily, obviously, we say life, death, and whatever, but death, dying, and life. So I wrote it down and I clicked. And the next box that came up and said, what is your course about? Well, that's a fair question, but I hadn't quite anticipated it. And so, as with the title, the answer to that question just sort of emerged. And it went like this. What I wrote, and I was thinking as I was writing, Bette Midler was right. Those afraid of dying will never learn to live. Isn't it funny? The moment we are born, as soon as we know how to know, we know we are going to die. And yet for some of us, we spend our lives trying to escape it, deny it, defy it, but it gets us in the end. Bette Midler was right. I believe there's some possibilities. Let's explore them. So I sent that off and they said yes. I said, oh, I am now in trouble. Well, this was not just a course. This was a 10-week course, right? An hour and a half at a crack. We were going to do this last fall, and they had given me a time, which was from 11:45 to 1:30. 45 in the morning to 1:30. And I looked at that and I thought about it all over the summer. That's what I'm telling you happened last spring. And finally, I wrote to the chairman of this particular program and I said, you know, I've taught a lot of people all over the world, and I've learned two things, that there are two times when human learning and engagement is absolutely impossible. One of those times is when they're hungry, and the other is when they've been fed. You have managed to encapsulate those times in one period. As much as I would like to do this, I can't. And I wouldn't ask them to go through it either. but I will do it again. I mean, I will do the course. I said I would, but we have to come up with something better. Well, to make a long story short, they said yes, and we're now going to do it Friday mornings from 9:30 until whatever, which sounds human to me. But now I was faced with the real problem. Okay, I had a title, I had sort of a thought line, but did I have 10 sessions? And all of a sudden I thought, you know, this is just a marvelous experiment I've been dying to do. Why don't we turn this whole 10-week period into one continuing open space that just happens to pop up 10 times? I mean, it's just a flip of the mind. And so rather than telling everybody we're going to do this marvelous new process, which has been done hundreds of thousands of times, don't you know? I said, what we're going to do is have a conversation. And hopefully we're going to have a good one. And here are the marks of a really good conversation as I've experienced it. I find it different. First of all, you have an issue that somebody actually cares about. Secondly, that issue is so complicated that no one person or small group could possibly figure it out. Thirdly, you have a large amount of diversity in terms of people and opinions. And you have a real sense of urgency, like, hey, we're going to have to get on with this now. And I said, you know, there are also some things that I've seen in good conversations, and you might just keep your eye out for them. First of all, whoever comes, they're always the right people. Not necessarily the people you'd put on your guest list, but whoever shows up. And why are they the right people? Well, it's quite simple. They care to be there. And I would much rather have people who care than those who don't give a shit. And the second principle goes like this. I mean, it's observation. Whenever it starts is the right time. You know, no meetings ever started on time. And whenever it does start, that's when you're ready. And whatever happens is the only thing that could have. You know, if you walk in with a set agenda in your head of all you're going to get, you're going to be frustrated. It won't happen that way. But more to the point, you're going to miss all the other neat stuff that did happen. And then there's another principle or thing that I've noticed. Wherever it happens is the right place. That means you don't have to come here to American University. You could go out to lunch. You could give your colleagues a buzz on the phone. Wherever it happens is the right place. And then, of course, when it's over, it's over. Don't go beating a dead horse, you know? I mean, we may have a lot to talk about. On the other hand, maybe we don't. So it's over when it's over. And I should warn you, the odd creatures do show up in good conversations. We have funny things. I always call them butterflies and bumblebees. And, oh yeah, there's this, I call it law, but you can call it anything you want to. It goes like this. If at any time while we're talking together, you find yourself neither learning nor contributing, take your 2 feet and move somewhere else that's more useful. And just the last thing, be prepared to be surprised. If you actually walk out with your expectations met, you have been cheated grossly. I mean, that means that you already knew it and should have been here in the first place. And then my last page, this is in my handout. I even have a handout. My last page says, you know, there is no required reading for this course, but we may write the book. And I said, now here's the format, you know, issue, participants, convener, discussion. And if it turns out, and all you got to do is get your laptop and send it to me, and I'll send it to everybody else. And at the end, I'll put it all together and make it pretty. And of course, if we don't have any hot issues and we don't have any discussion and nobody bothers to write a report, and then I just have 4 dots. Well, you know, I don't know that that's good, bad, or indifferent. But what I do feel is that anytime we have a chance, under whatever guise might show up, make sure that whoever is there and whoever cares to be there has a real chance to see who all the others are, because they might just turn out to be real human beings. So anyhow, I hope I've got you in severe confusion. And I wish you well for the next 2 days. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye.
Thank you.